Welcome to the ParentLife Podcast. My name is Jason Stanland. I'm the middle school pastor here at Fruit Cove Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida. This week we're going to be discussing family priorities. Are they in line with God's Word? Are they in line with what we as Christians affirm to be good, healthy family priorities? Maybe you've published a list of values, put it in a frame on your wall. Maybe you didn't. It really doesn't matter so long as you and your family know what your values are and are able to communicate them to each other and to your children. So joining us today is David Fann, or D-Fan, and I'm so glad to have you with us. So I actually met David probably years ago. His son and I actually went to college together out of the Baptist College of Florida, Travis. We played lots of ultimate frisbee and ping pong and studied a little, but we were pretty much just hanging out. We were buds. So always had big respect for you and for how you raised him, because I at least knew him. And so wanted to ask you just to come in and share a little bit about your family priorities. So what would you say for you and for your wife Sandy, what would you say these are your top family priorities?
Well, I agree with a statement that I heard you say or written somewhere, that a lot of family priorities are unstated but always seen. Mm-hmm. And so when I thought about this, and Sandy and I were kind of processing these statements, we thought about when we first got married. Someone had given us a wall plaque to hang on our wall when we got married. And it pertained to the verse from Joshua, where it was in 24:15, where Joshua says, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And so as a couple, that was definitely a top priority in our life, to establish that as a couple. When the kids came along, one of the principles that we wanted to, priorities we wanted to establish was a biblical principles in raising our kids. When I think about biblical principles, that was what we used to set up the rules in our house. And really, we only had 4 rules, and we could apply those to the biblical principles of love, respect, trust, and commitment. And then the only other thing that came to mind as priority for our family was to try to establish an order for those priorities in our lives. For me, it was God, my wife, my children, church, and then my career.
And I love what, so I want to go back and make sure we all caught this. You had decided that Joshua verse where, as for me and for my house, we were going to serve the Lord. You had decided that as part of your marriage before the kids had ever even come along. And I think it's important to notice that our family starts, at that moment, and it's out of that marriage, out of those priorities that we set at the beginning, that it then overflows into how we raise our kids. And I love how it was simple, only 4 rules. And so I've got a few rules, and I hope that my kids would say them back, but the idea that it's 4 makes it a lot more easier to come by. So let me ask you a little bit more of a difficult question then. How did you communicate these priorities to your kids? Like, how did they know these were the rules?
Okay. I'd say early on, our kids realized that church was a top priority in our lives. And so we would go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night was the established times when we would meet and go to church as a family. When our kids were getting close to school age, we moved out here to Fruit Cove. And one of the things that we noticed first, because we were members of First Baptist Church downtown, was when our kids got church age or school age, all of a sudden we weren't making the trip back downtown. And so we were missing out on Sunday night, and we were missing out on Wednesday nights with our kids.
Because it was a long run.
It was a long run. Yeah. And in school, they got schoolwork and things to do. So Sandy and I as a couple said, this doesn't match our priorities on what we wanted to raise, how we wanted to raise our family. And so very early on, we decided, okay, we need to find a church closer to home so that our kids could be a part of those things and still get schoolwork and those things done. So that's how we landed here at Fruit Cove, was because of the need and the priority of church being established in our kids' life. And so to see our kids know that we were willing to change the church that I grew up in to the church where this is now where we're going to establish our family. The other area would be recreational sports. So Travis played baseball growing up, and I was picked to be the coach of the team, and I took on the role and responsibility. And
Such a blessing.
yeah, and one of the things when we got the schedule as a coach was that Sunday was going to be a practice day for our team. And so I had, at that point, went to the association, went to the parents, and had to establish, as the coach of this team, we might not be as prepared as the other teams, but I'm just not going to practice on Sunday because this is a day set aside for me and my family to go to church. And so I had to earn the respect not only of the association and of the families to get that schedule changed, because Sunday was a top priority. So I thought, even for my son to see, I want you to be involved, but also it didn't allow it to misalign our priorities as a family. When it came to discipline, to be firm but apply grace and teachable moments in raising the kids. And then I think the other most visible way that I would say I communicated the priorities of our family to my kids was whatever the priorities were for my family were also the top priorities in my life. Mm-hmm. And so for me, not just to have this set of rules, here's the top priorities I've established for you as my kids and my house and the way you're going to be, but those priorities also had to be evident in my life. So if you were to have my kids in a soundproof booth off, and you were to
know that we don't,
and you were to bring them out right now, and you were to say, hey, what would you say was your dad's top priorities? And did they align with your dad's top priorities for the family? They had to be in agreement, because how would I establish those in my kids if those priorities weren't meaningful to me and top priority in my own life?
Yeah, and kids don't lie when it comes to that kind of topic, like working with students and with families. It's pretty obvious sometimes when you're talking with kids about what their family is most excited about and what their family really seeks as a top priority. And it's not necessarily because their dad said, hey, this is our top priority as a family, or there's some placard on a wall somewhere that says, hey, as a family, this is our top priority. It's just that's what they do. That's where they spend their time, their money, their energy, their focus. And so I find that a lot in families, because what I've said in the past is that our family priorities may not be stated, may not be outwardly stated, but they're never unseen. They catch what our priorities are a lot more than when we have to teach them our priorities. However, it's really important that, like you said, they're both in sync.
They're both in sync.
Yeah,
because even the verse from Joshua says, as for me, he established me first, me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So he established, I see it, that he said it's going to be a top priority in my life first, and then I'm going to establish this also that my family is going to follow these same priorities.
Yeah. And we got to be careful as dads, especially, like if we say one thing and yet do another, then we run the risk of becoming a hypocrite in our child's eyes. And then what begins to happen, and there's actually some research to back this up, is that a child says, well, why do I need to become Christian if this level of Christianity, this hypocritical level of Christianity, is good enough, apparently. And then we do a great disservice to our children that there's this disconnect. So now you've kind of already addressed this last question, but I kind of want to just ask it a little bit more pointedly. Has there ever come a time when you felt like your family's priorities were misaligned? Like what you say, okay, these are our priorities, but then in your practice you're saying, something's not right, okay? And then how did you go about changing that? Did you change your priorities? Did you change your behaviors? And then how did you communicate that you were changing those behaviors to your kids, if that makes sense?
It does. And I would say when I think about that question would be early on in my career. And if you remember my list a few minutes ago was God, my wife, my kids, my church, and then my career. Well, that's a great order of those things. But early on, I became a dad when I was 20 years old. Travis was born in June. I didn't turn 21 until August. So before I was even legal age, I was a dad.
Oh man!
And so establishing these things and growing up in the home that I had, I wanted to give my kids everything that I thought that I missed out of in my upbringing. And so my career became the biggest push in my life in my 20s. And so I'm working up the corporate ladder, establishing myself in my career. I took every hour of overtime that I could take. I took extra jobs just to give my kids more. But what I realized, to give my kids more meant they got less of Dad, and they got less of me. And so it was a teachable moment, not only in my life, well, where's your priorities at? Because if career, if that list where I placed it on my priority list, it was in last place, all of a sudden it became first place. Now my relationship with God was taking a back seat to my career. My wife was, my kids were, and everything else. So my list had to be flipped over.
Had to be
inverted. Taking that to forward, raising teenagers and the priorities they have to set their school schedule and their extracurricular activities, work schedules, and the things that they have, we'd be able to testify to them, say, hey, Dad's had this problem before. You have to understand your priorities and understand there's balance to it all. God gives us enough time in a day to enjoy all of these things that would be a top priority in our lives. But if you give yourself to one thing, then these other areas are going to suffer. And so those teachable moments and those teachable conversations to apply that even Dad can get his priorities misaligned, and then the teachable moment, okay, what's happening to my relationships? What's happening in these areas that I find that are a top priority in my life?
And man, what a powerful moment that even as your kids, matured and grew, to go and say, okay, in my teenage life, I'm beginning to see my priorities getting out of whack. Oh, you remember when Dad experienced this a few years ago? I guess I need to do what Dad did and get my behaviors in line. So wow, that's really powerful to think about.
Yeah, and those are those teachable moments. And so if those, like I said, those priorities are my top priorities, but also for my family, then it opens up the door for me to have those great conversations with them. Because again, there were times when Travis gave himself to, he was heavily involved in student ministry as well as band and drum major and everything else. But it's like, okay, you're going to have to find this balance in what is top priority, because really, where's your relationship with God? And then how's your relationship with Mom and Dad right now? If it seems kind of strained, it might be because you're giving a lot of attention to some other things that have become a higher priority in your life. And according to Scripture, God says, I want to be the top priority. I don't want to be somewhere in the list. I want to be top priority, and all these other things will fall in line properly.
That's awesome. And as a fun blessing of God now, Travis, who is my age, also now has a kid. And so he's raising his own family, and he's establishing priorities and communicating priorities to now his kid in the same way that you did.
And that's the measuring stick. To me, it's when your kids finally reach the age of sending you a Father's Day card or a birthday card, and they mention the unstated priorities that you have.
That's cool.
Thank you for setting the example in your time management. Thank you for setting the example on how you treat Mom. Thank you for doing these things. But then you see it full circle now, that church is a priority in my son's life, and how he's raising my granddaughter. And so those are the things that you get to see full circle on this side of raising kids. But as a parent, we never stop parenting.
Right.
But still, there's the opportunity to see that now full circle.
That's cool. David, thank you so much for coming on. For our church members, or if you're in attendance with our church, David's actually one of our Connect Group leaders. So at 11 o'clock, you lead the Young Families. That's a Young Families Connect Group. I'm actually in that group, kind of, like when I'm there, which I think has been like 3 times this year. But it's actually a really good group. And so he assists leading in that group along with his wife, Sandy. And so if you're looking for a Connect Group at the 11 o'clock hour, I would highly recommend just check him out. Yeah, and just come jump in and be a part. So thank you so much for joining in. I hope that you'll kind of take some of this to heart, especially dads who are kind of watching this. If your wife is making you or something like that, please just kind of tune in and think, okay, what are my priorities, and are they in sync with what I'm doing, with what my kids are seeing? What's going on there? Thank you so much for tuning in. I would encourage you to go ahead and subscribe so you can get the updates every week as they come out at Monday at 8 a.m. And also, we would love to interact with you. If you have any questions, if there's topics that you would like us to address as part of this show, you can email us at parentlife@fruitcove.com. Thank you so much for being a part, and we'll see you next week.